I'm Damien Valentine, and check out Enter the Empire.
I'm Tracy Harwood, and I'm academic.
Ricky, grow.
Hi, my name is Phil. Hi, I'm Phil Rice.
Perfect. That's all we need.
Hello, I'm Tracy Harwood, and today I'm joined by Ricky Grove.
Hello.
Phil Rice.
Hi there.
And Damien Valentine, and you are listening to And Now for Something Completely Machinima podcast. Today we're talking about a film that I've picked, but before we move on to that, let me just remind you that you can catch up with a project that Phil's been working on to restore some classic machinima, remaster them 4K quality, pretty amazing, that you can find on his Vimeo channel, and the short address is bit.ly/machiniplex. And Phil has also been working on a remastering of Bloodspell, one of Hugh Hancock's classic films from 2006, 2007, I think we said. And you can find that on a link that I'll put in the notes here to Phil's YouTube channel. Right, let's move on to our pick this week.
Yeah, your pick.
My pick. Yeah. Okay. It's super interestingly, this month, three of us have picked films independently, of course. We always pick our films independently, where we're looking at a dream theme to them. And my pick this week is a film that's been made in Unreal. It's called Horror and was made by a guy called Yang Hyunjun. It was released on the 4th of June 2023, and apologies if I have mispronounced your name. Now, I don't know too much about the artist, and thank goodness he's got an ArtStation account. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be able to attempt to pronounce the name badly as I have done anyway. On the portfolio on ArtStation, Yang describes himself as a look dev and lighting artist. Now, when I looked that up, look devs help build worlds and characters by creating the color, the textures, the materials for everything you see in a kind of final rendered images. So he's a real detail expert, and he's based in South Korea, and has clearly been exploring a workflow with Unreal Engine. So insofar as I'm aware, anyway, this is pretty much the only story-based work that I think he's created. So to the film. It's probably not so much a horror for me as it might be for you guys, actually. It's about a young man who has dozed off on a subway train, going, we're not terribly sure where, and he's hallucinating or dreaming that he's surrounded by bald men, and information that he should actually be remembering to take his hair loss pills. He's carrying a pot of these pills, presumably his medication, but he can't seem to get the lid off, and the scene around him just turns horrific for him. Bald men everywhere, and everything we see as a kind of, a down and out caricature, really, of baldness. And eventually, he himself is shown as a bald character. Now, what I like about this is the way that this story is told. There's no music. It's just a kind of a graunching soundscape, partially kind of representing the train as it rolls over the tracks, and also the editing and mood of the scenes is just kind of completely evocative of a horror genre. But I'm not sure it's horrific per se. I think I'd be really interested to hear what you guys have got to say about it. But to me, the subject is a little absurd. But of course, it's not. Both men and women lose their hair as they age. Some are predisposed to baldness through their genes, and others, it can kind of impact sex drive. So it's something that's that can really change behavior and even personality completely. So for me, this really intriguing natural sensitivity, particularly targeting men in this film, which I think is really astonishingly well illustrated through a whole range of cues, from the way the focus of the camera is used to the shock and horror on the character's face, which is probably the weakest part of this, actually, to the environment, the details on the other avatars in the scene, and the streaming of the lead messages in the train's information system, and also things like the use of a heartbeat and that kind of creepy scale in the sound design, as well as, of course, the subject matter portrayal. It did rather remind me of the way that Evan Ryan, Crad Productions, animated that, that sort of feeling of psychosis in the main character that in that film that you did, Phil, with him last year. What was it called?
917.
917. Yeah, it kind of captured that a little bit as well. Anyway, what did you guys think?
Well, I was really surprised when I saw you chosen a film called Horror, because I know that's not really your style of choice. I started watching it and I thought, why has Tracy picked a horror film? But this is also live action, because it opens up on that subway car, and it looks like it's a live action subway car because it's made with Unreal Engine 5, and it's done in such a way that it looks real. It doesn't look like an animated car.
Yeah, it's a great opening shot. Yeah.
And then you start to see the characters. Okay, this is actually animated. I mean, they do look pretty realistic, but you can tell that they are still animated. And then of course the Unreal 5 comes across. But yeah, it's very unsettling, this film, once you get into it, and you don't really know what's happening, and he's kind of hallucinating, and the faces are changing, and it's kind of, you don't know, is there going to be a monster in it or what, because it's very dark and gloomy, and the music and the atmosphere and the sound kind of makes you feel really tense, and you don't really know what's going on. And of course, as you watch the film, it all kind of comes together. But yeah, it wasn't as horrific like the title expected, like I expected from the title, but it still is a very dark and moody film. And his hair loss is obviously something that's really affecting him, and so when he does doze off, he's dreaming about it, and it's something that obviously really gets to him, and it's affecting his whole life, because even when he's asleep, he can't get away from this thing that's obviously bothering him, to the point where he's getting these pills to try and change the fact that he's losing his hair. But when you see him awake, he's got a full head of hair. Like there's no bald spots on the top or anything. He's got a full massive head of hair, and so you kind of left wondering, why are you taking these pills? You don't need to. And that's not a question you get answered in it. I think the film was masterfully created. I mean, it takes a lot to build this kind of atmosphere in a film. There's not a single line of dialogue. I mean, there's text on the background and everything, but there's no spoken words, which is, again, is another thing we've talked about in previous episodes when we've encountered films that have no dialogue. And it's a hard thing to pull off, because sometimes we've looked at films where it's not been quite as effective as it has been in others, and this is one of the ones that it works well, not having anything said, because I think if you did have dialogue to this, it would ruin the effect of this whole dream nightmare, what's really going on kind of image, because you add words to it, it takes you away from that. And so you managed to pull that off, and the camera work and the animation and details of facial animation specifically, because you can tell that this guy he's haunted by what he's seeing and going through, and it really comes across in the character model, that the way the look of horror in his face and his eyes going wide. And yeah, I was really impressed by this, and it's another one of those films where you kind of feel like, what can I learn from this? So I haven't got didn't inspire the fabric thing like the other film we talked about a few weeks ago, but there's definitely in this film that I would like to go back and watch again and see what can I do to improve my own craft. And that's one of the highest compliments I think I can pay, is this makes me want to do better.
Great comments, Damien.
I had a little, good comments and a good choice. It was an enjoyable film, and I urge people to watch it. It's better than average. I had some problems, though. One is I didn't understand a lot of stuff. For example, I thought he was taking the pills, and the pills were what was creating his hallucinations. I also didn't realize it was about baldness until the end, when the label, and also there was a tiny bit of dialogue, but it was unusual dialogue. It was on the digital readout in the subway. There was some dialogue, take your stuff like that. So I was a little confused about the story, which made it harder for me to engage in what was going on. Also, I think, of course, a viewer just watching the film for the first time won't have this connection, but I think the film suffers a little bit in comparison to the Motsify Unreal films that we saw, because those are sort of just solidly made. So this wasn't quite as good as that, and needed some work on trying to focus the narration to give people enough information to get what it is that's going on. I also, some of the facial animations, although they were well executed, they seemed to have a little uncanny valley for me, which took me out. I don't know why, but it was only briefly here and there. Maybe it was just in the way that they rendered it or something. The textures on the face seem a little clay-like as opposed to skin-like. I'm not sure. But those are minor comparisons. Well, not minor. The story is not minor, but I wish they would have fixed that. But most of it is just, I think, a little more skill, a little more work on making more films like this. But for what it is, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. It really captured the mood quite well. So those are my thoughts.
Good points. Phil?
Yeah. Probably the best way, first, I feel like I should kind of situate myself a little bit here. So we're just going to do this, and then we're just going to go like this. If I deliver my whole review like this, does it give me more gravitas?
It gives you the gravitas right
so
there.
The thing about the, yeah. Okay, so okay, opening shot, like Damien, I was wowed. Just hadn't focused on any of the characters yet, but just the setting and all of that had a sheen to it that yeah, it was. I mean, if it hadn't said Unreal Engine 5 in the title, I would have definitely thought that it was, some kind of live action backdrop or whatever. But yeah, once you zero in on some of the characters, Ricky, I think I could be wrong on this, and I hope I don't get myself into trouble for saying this, but main character in particular, eyes just a little too close together. Like when whoever was setting the face, there's a certain balance. Not every face has it, of course. There's a lot of variety in faces or whatever. But in this character, like the eyes were just a little too unnaturally close together. I think we're talking a centimeter difference, and that face would be fine. I think the skin is fine. I think the render is fine. I think it's a matter of proportions. And it could be that these are handcrafted characters, or maybe he didn't use a tool like Character Creator 4, for example. It's kind of hard to do it wrong with Reallusion's tool. Like they tend to help keep things balanced by moving related muscle groups together when you're doing the morphs and stuff. So this has like a handcrafted feel, and I think that may be part of what made it a little bit unrealistic, but very hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole. So it's weird because like the atmosphere was definitely, kind of a horror hallucinogen type of atmosphere, and he pulled that off very well. But the story, when you pull out what the actual story is, it's kind of like a Saturday Night Live skit, but you take out all the jokes. I mean, a guy is on a train, he's paranoid, and sees everyone he sees is bald. He's paranoid, and he's fiddling with his bottle, and at the end he can't get it open, and all of a sudden he's bald, and it's a guy that just is afraid of going bald. And like you figure, okay, now give that to whoever the writers are at SNL. Let them spice it up. We can make this kind of funny. We'll have Jim Carrey play the guy, and he'll have a toupee. We'll take off. Like, essentially, that's the type of story, is one that's at its heart kind of silly, kind of poking fun at people, but not a group of people that, I mean, men are the easiest person in the world to make fun of right now. This is just making fun of men. No one criticizes you for that. White men, even better. But men in general, no problem. So it's a safe target. It's safer than making fun of fat people. You can make fun of men. And this is you're right, Tracy. Men are not the only ones that have pattern baldness, but it's certainly a more popular topic among men. And I think one that the pharmaceutical industry has, and other related industries, have really taken advantage of that paranoia and the quote unquote status symbol of keeping your full head of hair and all that. And just really preying on weak minds that essentially is a paranoia rooted in fear of death. That's what I think. I think fear of baldness is ultimately just fear of death. And there's a whole industry that has taken advantage of trying to make men as insecure about that as possible to get them to buy a product, So on the one hand, this story could be seen as it's a serious commentary on this man who, like Damien pointed out, has a full head of hair. Maybe he has genetic reasons to, like on my family, they say that it's, if you want to know if you're going to go bald, look at your mother's father.
Okay.
My mother's father had nothing by age 30, and all her brothers, nothing, like just gone. And then if you've ever seen my father, it's gone. So even if I'm a genetic freak, either way, I'm supposed to be screwed, right? I'm going to lose all my hair. Well, if I weren't shaving this on purpose, I would have a mop. I mean, it's not going anywhere. It's receded a little bit or whatever. But I don't know. I had a little bit different attitude towards balding because at about the age of 20, I'd convinced myself that it was going to be inevitable for me. And so I just decided I'm not going to be a person who becomes insecure about that, period. And just rejected it on principle. Well, then it turns out I kept my hair, but I still prefer being bald. But I know so many guys who it's the end of the world, they think, when they start to lose their hair. And they'll do anything to keep it happening. We have a recent president of the United States who clearly bought into that and would put a dead animal up there, basically, to not look bald, even though he looks silly, So this is a real thing. And young men are the best targets because they're most concerned about their appearance. They're in the game, They're trying to find a mate or whatever that urge is. And everything about our culture has told us, full head of lush hair makes you a better pick. So you better have it. So this is a story of a guy who's bought into that to the point where he's putting some chemical in his body, thinking it's going to keep him have his hair, but he's still paranoid about it.
Yeah.
So it could be, Ricky, you're right, that he's hallucinating because of the side effect of the pills, which are revealed to be hair loss prevention medicine at the end, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also just be that he is so gripped with paranoid and maybe has a particular bent towards, there's some other psychosis going on that's causing the hallucinations, but it's rooted in just abject fear of it's happening to everybody. I can't let it happen to me. It's going to happen to me, and that's real. It's not nearly as dramatic as it plays out in this short. It's almost comical at the end when it's revealed that all this psychosis was just for the hair pills.
Yeah.
That's almost funny, except that he gave it away in the first line of the description.
Yeah.
I read that right before I hit play. So there was, I don't know what the effect would have been if I'd waited till then to know, all this was about hair loss, but I already knew it. So I don't know, that really disrupted my viewing.
In your analogy, your Saturday Night Live analogy, you're talking about lifting removing all of the humor. Do you think if they had added some humor to the film, it would have enlivened the story a bit?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. Because I think that for me personally, the topic like many Saturday Night Live sketches, by the way. Just isn't that intriguing to me? Isn't that, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not optimistic about the upper limits of how funny this could be.
I see.
Like, even if it was, if you bring Conan O'Brien back out of writer retirement and get him in here, get these top comedy writers on this, is this really even that funny a thing?
Yeah.
That I'm not sure about.
I don't think this would be funny. I think if it's meant to be an exploration of the psychology of young men who are afraid of losing their hair, turning that into a comedy would not make this work.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about comedy yuck yuck. I'm talking about the black comedy, because there were opportunities with the other people on the subway platform to do some comic reactions or things like that.
Okay.
Which could be strange, but they didn't do any of that.
Yeah, and Saturday Night Live, by the way, they do black comedy stuff just like this. Like, they would make it look like horror, whatever, and at the end, helped by the live studio audience to pipe in laughs, so you're supposed to laugh, but they would have landed on this joke of he's just concerned about losing his hair, or there would have been something, and Will Ferrell would have come in with a weird.
The title of the film horror would be a misleading thing.
Right.
It's not really horror. It's just.
But I don't get the sense that was the intent of this filmmaker.
No, neither do I.
But I'm not sure what the intent of this filmmaker was, because it does have the makings of, that reveal at the end is a punchline. Like it or not, intended or not, that's a punchline. It's just like, but
the setup.
It almost feels like it wasn't on purpose, and so then I'm not sure how well humor works when it's okay. So there are things that aren't made to be funny, but end up being funny. Like, let's say 60% of all B movies ever made. There's a chance that they're just hilarious.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen anything by a guy named Neil Breen, he is completely serious about his work, and his movies are the funniest things you've ever seen. He has no idea. So is that what this is? I don't know. So there's great craft going on here. That's for sure.
Yes, indeed.
It is a cut below the films that we looked at a couple weeks back. The ones that Ricky picked. It is definitely not in that same tier at all. In every regard, it's not in that tier. Like in the planning and the writing and the everything. But there's some real promise here, and I mean it shows that this is what was his title, Damien? A layout.
No, he's a look dev.
Look development.
So basically a stylist.
Yes.
He's a set and atmospheric stylist, and there's no fault with that in this movie.
Well,
clearly,
I'd also like to point out that it's an individual making a film as opposed to a collective.
As opposed to a team, right?
Yeah. And you're going to have a difference in quality level, for one thing.
Yeah.
Also, feedback in a collective, you're going to get feedback. If you go off the wrong path on some aspect of the film, the rest of the team can go, no, we need to go this way.
Before release.
Yes, as a single filmmaker, you can go down that wrong path and you have no idea.
Release. Yeah.
I think the set design is his strength. That's obviously is what he does, because of the way that both Phil and I thought this was a live action shot at the beginning, before we got to see any close-ups of the characters.
Yeah, that's his strength. And I applaud him for going outside of his comfort zone, even though I wouldn't give this an A+ in all regards, but I love that he's stretching like that. And if this was a first attempt working with characters, I have no idea. But the key is it doesn't have to be his last attempt.
Absolutely.
And it is above average for sure.
Yeah.
It's way above average in some areas, and in other areas it's just above average. And the story, story's tough sometimes because even though there's not a lot of dialogue in this, there is the on-screen wording on the what do
prompter.
They call those things?
The
digital prompters.
Yeah. And that was actually effectively done, because it it didn't linger on it too long, but enough to give you a sense of an idea coming through. I liked that. That was very tasteful. But storytelling, as Ricky has many times pointed out, you know, on the other side of the world from the West, there's different traditions and different ways of getting the storytelling done. And there's a sense of what could be called translation. But I'm not talking about language per se, word to this, you know, Chinese to English or anything like that. But the whole way of approaching story is a different language. Cinematic language, to a degree, has differences.
Yeah.
And so I find myself questioning on this as I watch it and I critique it. I'm thinking, but am I missing something there because I'm culturally uprooted? You know, I'm throwing a lot of assumptions that I have from where I grew up about the culture around men's hair loss, and I'm just accepting those as givens and then critiquing this film. And is that fair? I don't know. You know, I think attitudes about that may vary. Clearly, nowhere do men think bald is a good idea. I just wish it weren't considered such a big idea. You know, it's just part of life. You know, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You can staple ant legs to your head if you want, but it's, you know, that doesn't look any better. So anyway, an intriguing and thought-provoking film. Made me there's a lot that I admire about it, and it made me think about it a lot. So I like films that do that.
Me too.
Brilliant. Great comments again. Another really interesting discussion. Film actually made in South Korea by a Korean artist. His first machinima type film.
Very cool.
From what I can tell. So yeah, I think
good job.
That feedback will, I'm sure, feed into the next projects that he develops.
Yeah, please do keep.
You know,
more.
Absolutely.
Make more. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And probably, you know, feed into it some way, if this is even feasible, of how you might communicate the Eastern versus Western cultural context. Because that's, I think, you know, we picked that up a couple of times this month in some of the films. You know, the fact that we are Western consumers of culture, and these are not necessarily Western films that we're looking at. We miss some of the nuances, I think. How you explain that or put that across, I don't really know. I mean, you pointed out the eyes being
too close.
Yeah, but maybe that was deliberate. Maybe that was
so.
You know, a particular thing that the creator wanted to sort of focus on in order to evoke kind of uneasiness in what he was doing, because I got the sense that there was a lot of deliberate choices in the way that things were presented there. But nonetheless, I think another really interesting film.
The fact that it was that it comes from Korea is very interesting too, in this whole East-West discussion, because of all the places, save maybe Japan, you know, South Korea has had tremendous Western influence.
Yes,
in the last 50 years, and it still has very deep cultural roots, you know, in Korea and Korea's history, but a lot of Western influence since the Korean conflict. And then, I mean, and there's some amazing. We talked a couple of weeks ago, Ricky, about our shared appreciation for Hong Kong and cinema from that part of the world. Oh my goodness, the stuff that comes out of Korea.
Oh, amazing.
Ooh-wee. Amazing. Some of the best stuff in the world.
Indeed. The cultural influence is even more complex today, because the American influence culture, Korea, and then Koreans come to America to influence American culture.
That's right.
Which comes back to Korea again. Yeah. And then the recent winning of the South Korean film of her Academy Award started people jumping in. So, you know, it's this constant back and forth between influences, which I think are fascinating.
I'm sure that I'd be surprised if we didn't mention it, but if we didn't, Parasite is the movie Ricky's referring to.
Yeah.
one of the best pieces of cinema, in my book, ever made ever in the whole history of it. It is, you cannot miss that film. It's extraordinary. And we could do an hours-long podcast just talking about that.
Yep.
But we won't.
Well,
No.
thank you, Phil. Thank you. Well, great comments, guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed the discussion as ever with you guys. That's it for this week. You've been listening to the And Now for Something Completely Machinima podcast. I'm Tracy. With me today has been Ricky, Phil, and Damien, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.
Bye.
I'm driving like they do in the movies.